Welcome to Wisconsin Wasp Watchers, a program where we use wasps to monitor for invasive beetles. Wisconsin Wasp Watchers is brought to you by the Wisconsin First Detector Network. WIFDN is a statewide community science program that empowers people to take action against invasive species through education and volunteer opportunities. The Wisconsin Wasp Watchers program is just one of many projects that WIFDN coordinates. You can find more information about Wasp Watchers and find documents related to Wasp Watchers on the Wisconsin First Detector Network website. The Wasp Watchers program monitors for invasive wood-boring beetles. And so we'd like to start by just reminding people how invasive insects spread. And so typically our invasive insects arrive in Wisconsin in wooden shipping or packaging materials like the crates shown at right. Sometimes they arrive in finished wood products like furniture. They can also be transported in plant material, or they can be transported in firewood. The Wisconsin Wasp Watchers program focuses on Buprestid beetles. These are also known as jewel beetles, metallic wood-boring beetles, or flathead borers. There are both native and invasive Buprestid beetles in Wisconsin. And as a family, their larvae bore on roots, stems or trunks, logs, and leaves of all types of plants. And so when these insects are present in high enough numbers, they can cause severe damage or even death to these plants. Typically, the Buprestid beetles feed on dead or dying wood on otherwise healthy trees. The emerald ash borer is perhaps the most famous invasive Buprestid beetle here in Wisconsin and potentially across the country. It was first detected in Wisconsin in 2008, and since then it has spread to 59 of our 72 counties in Wisconsin. Looking at the map at right, though, we can see that while emerald ash borer is very widespread across southern Wisconsin, where it is present in the northern parts of the state, it's typically present in only a few townships in each county. And so with the Wasp Watchers program, we're continuing to monitor emerald ash borer presence in the southern part of the state and to detect new locations of emerald ash borer where it has not yet been found. In addition, there are 3 invasive oak pests that we're very concerned about. None of these have been found in Wisconsin yet, but if they do arrive in Wisconsin, it's very likely that we'll detect them through the Wasp Watchers program. The first is the oak splendor beetle. This one hasn't even been found in North America yet, but it is on the federal priority list. So basically that means that people are keeping their eye out for this beetle all across the United States. The gold-spotted oak borer is our second invasive oak pest of concern. It has shown to be highly invasive in California, and it tends to feed on larger oaks, so those that are 8 or more inches in diameter. And the third oak pest that we're concerned about here in Wisconsin is the European oak borer. It is present in similar climates in Michigan, New York, and Ontario, and so we believe that it will be able to survive here in Wisconsin if it does arrive. And in Ontario, they've seen that this pest prefers to feed on red oaks. So I'd like to share a little background on the Wisconsin Wasp Watchers program. It's a volunteer monitoring program focused on detecting these invasive Buprestid beetles. Currently, it's run jointly by the Wisconsin First Detector Network and our USDA partners in Wisconsin. Similar volunteer monitoring programs are conducted in other states, and additionally, USDA staff also monitor for these Buprestid beetles. And where we are looking for invasive Buprestid beetles, our goal is to find 50 or more beetles in each county through these monitoring efforts. And those could be both native Buprestid beetles and invasive or non-native Buprestid beetles in that count of 50 or more beetles. And like we mentioned, there's many other states with similar efforts because these Buprestid beetles can be difficult to detect through traditional lures and traps, and so the volunteer monitoring program really helps us detect these species more readily. And so you might be wondering why we are talking about wasps when we are in fact looking for beetles. And that's because the Wasp Watchers program uses biosurveillance. And so that is using one species, in this case the smoky winged beetle bandit wasp, to find another species. In this case we're looking at the whole family of Buprestid beetles. And so why is this smoky winged beetle bandit such a good target for biosurveillance? Well, this is a native stingless wasp, so it's completely harmless to humans, but it preys on the Buprestid beetles, and so it paralyzes them and carries them back to their nests to provision their nests. And especially early on, when emerald ash borer was detected in the United States, traditional traps and lures were proving to be ineffective at detecting emerald ash borer. And then it was found that it was actually easier to detect emerald ash borer by finding where the smoky-winged beetle bandits were nesting and then collecting beetles that they dropped outside of their nests. And so to participate in Wasp Watchers, one of the main things we need to learn is actually where to look for the Cerceris, or smoky-winged beetle bandit nests. And it turns out that they really love to nest in hard-packed sandy soil that has some short vegetation around it. And for our purposes, because we're trying to detect the wood-boring beetles, the best sites are those that are within 200 to 300 yards of a wooded area. So some examples of hard-packed sandy soil sites could include ball fields that have that sandy component, trails or roads that are made with packed sand, or areas and campsites that are also covered in packed sand. And at lower left, you can see a cluster of Cerceris, or smoky-winged beetle bandit nests, and we've circled a couple beetles that they've dropped by the nests. So as you consider joining the Wasp Watchers program, it's good to know what criteria to look for when you're determining a site to monitor for Cerceris nests, and therefore for the beetles. So remember that you should be looking for a site with packed, not loose, sandy soil. That packed sandy soil should have some clumps of vegetation, either kind of across the area or at least along the edges. The packed sandy soil area should be within about 200 to 300 yards of a wooded area. And then finally, you need to make sure that you have permission to access the site. So either choose a site that is publicly accessible or contact the site owner or manager to gain permission to access it. So we'll take a look at a few pictures to determine if we think this would be a good site to look for our Cerceris nests. So at left, we have a picture of some sand dunes along Lake Michigan. Looking at our 4 criteria, we can see from the picture that there are definitely clumps of vegetation in the sand. However, dune sand is very loose. It's not packed, and so this is not an ideal place to look for Cerceris nests. And from the picture, we can't really tell if it's close to a wooded area or if it's a publicly accessible site. What about this? We've got a nice baseball field, and we mentioned that baseball fields are a great place to look for Cerceris nests. Let's take a look at those 4 criteria again. We definitely have packed sandy soil, and we can see from the top of the picture that we're very close to a wooded area. However, you can also see that this is a well-maintained ball field that gets raked regularly, and so there's not going to be any vegetation in that sandy soil, and there's going to be too much disturbance from the raking maintenance for Cerceris to want to nest in this site. And so while we often start with baseball fields as initial sites to look for Cerceris nests, if we discover that they are well-maintained fields, we usually take that off the list of sites to monitor for the summer because it's unlikely that Cerceris will nest in those well-maintained, raked baseball fields. What about this baseball field? So as we can see, it has packed sandy soil and definitely has clumps of vegetation. So this would be a good candidate for scouting for Cerceris nests. We would need to check and see whether the site is within 200 to 300 yards of a wooded area, and again, make sure that we have permission to access the site. So we focus a lot of attention on Cerceris nests because we want to be able to find them and identify them, but we know that people are interested in learning more about the Cerceris wasp or the smoky winged beetle bandit itself. You don't need to know how to identify this wasp to participate, but it can be helpful to be familiar with it. So as I mentioned before, it's a native stingless wasp, so it poses no threat to you or your pets. And they grow about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch long. You'll notice that the wings are dark or smoky colored, as its name suggests. And then one defining feature of this wasp is that it has a single pale yellow band on the abdomen, which is kind of on this picture, the lower portion of the wasp's body. Females and males look slightly different in that the females will have 3 yellow spots on their faces and males will only have 2. The males also tend to be a bit smaller. So then if you're looking for Cerceris nests, perhaps you've selected a baseball field or another site with packed sandy soil to scout for nests, what should you look for? So one key feature of the Cerceris nests is that they go straight down into the ground. They're not angled. Other wasps will dig nests that are more angled into the ground rather than straight down. They're about the diameter of the pencil at the opening of the nests, and they're surrounded by the excavated soil or sand. So the picture at the upper right shows this really well. You can see the hole or the entrance to the nest, and it's pretty uniformly surrounded by a circle of excavated material. And then as the picture in the lower right shows, the nests are often right next to or partially under a clump of grass or other vegetation. And then colonies or multiple nests grouped together are common. And you can see that in the picture at left where we have what appear to be 5 Cerceris nests grouped right together. So while it's not super important to be able to identify the Cerceris wasp and differentiate it from lookalike wasps, it can be helpful to talk about some of the lookalikes who also dig nests in sand. So the first is the bee wolf genus of wasps who dig nests in sand as well. But when they do dig their nests, that excavated material is all to one side of the nest rather than surrounding it. If you look at the wasp itself in the picture at left, you'll also see that they have multiple yellow bands on their abdomen and rust-colored wings. And these wasps tend to prey on small bees. The cicada killer is another wasp that we might come across that also digs its nest in sand or loose soil. As the picture at right shows, they leave this very distinct trail of excavated material to the side of their nest opening. On their abdomen, instead of that single pale yellow band that we see on the Cerceris wasp, the cicada killer has multiple yellow bands that are broken. And these are relatively large wasps. They're up to 2 inches long, and that means that they prey on larger insects, so in this case, cicadas. Sand wasps are another lookalike species. They dig their nests in loose sand rather than packed sand. And you'll see they have multiple pale yellow bands on their abdomen, and they also tend to have reddish or greenish eyes instead of brown eyes. And then finally, our group of digger wasps also tend to dig their nests in sand. They do not have any yellow bands on their abdomen, and so that separates them from all these other species. And they also prey on larger insects like katydids and crickets. So by now you might be wondering how you can join the Wasp Watchers project. So the first step is to watch or attend a training session, which you're doing right now. And then after this, you'll want to review the Wasp Watchers Volunteer Handbook. Once you've reviewed the handbook, you can complete the Wasp Watchers Volunteer Quiz, which also serves as a form to indicate that you're interested in participating in the program. At that point, you'll gather your supplies, and then you'll start monitoring. And the project's active monitoring period runs from about mid-June through mid-September each year. And so we're going to take a closer look at some of these steps to help you prepare to participate in the Wasp Watchers project. So the volunteer handbook and quiz are both available at the Wasp Watchers website, which again, from the Wisconsin First Detector Network homepage, you can click on Wasp Watchers and the links will be posted there. Or you can directly email the WIFDN coordinator to request the links to these resources. In terms of supplies, you need a pretty limited amount of supplies to participate in this project. Each participant will have a data sheet for each site that they're monitoring. Ideally, you'll print this out so you can fill it out easily when you visit your site. Each participant will also have a printed sheet of sample tags to put with the beetles that they collect. You'll need a pencil to fill out the sample tags because they go with the beetles. And once we send the beetles in for identification, they often get preserved in an alcohol that will wash away pen ink, but pencil will stay visible on the sample tags. And then you'll need small Ziploc bags to collect the beetles in. If you aren't able to collect these supplies on your own, or say you don't have access to a printer to print the data sheets and sample tags, we will work with you to deliver the supplies to you so you can participate. So once you've gathered your supplies, you'll want to start looking for a site. And so the first step of that, again, is to look for a site near you that has those 4 criteria with packed sandy soil, that has clumps of vegetation, the site is within 200 to 300 yards of a wooded area, and you have permission to access the site or it has public access. So if you already have a site in mind, that's great. You can just go ahead and visit it. Otherwise, if you'd like to participate but you're not sure where to look, you can contact the project coordinator and we will help you find a site to scout. Once you've selected a site to monitor, the next step then is to scout for the Cerceris nests. So this is the first step because if you have a site that doesn't end up having Cerceris nests, you'll either need to kind of retire the site or start looking at a different site. And so we look for the Cerceris nests starting in about mid-June. That's when the Cerceris are beginning to be active and collecting the Buprestid beetles. And so the pictures below show an example. If your site is a baseball field, show an example of how you can scout that site for the Cerceris nests. First by walking around the edge of the field and then the baseline, and then you can also kind of crisscross the site. So when you scout for nests, the first thing to answer is, did you find any Cerceris nests? And if you did, that's great. So that means that site will be a great site to monitor for beetles throughout the summer. If on your first visit you don't find any Cerceris nests, that's okay. The first thing you might do is check back at that same site in a week or so to look for nests once again. And then on that second visit, if you find nests, that's awesome. You can keep monitoring that site for the beetles. And if you didn't find any nests on the second visit, you can keep checking back, but most likely it's not a site that Cerceris wasps are actively using. And so you'll want to let the project coordinators know where you looked and that you didn't find any nests there, and then you can try to find another site that does have nests. When you have a site that has nests, then the first step to do is get out your data sheet and fill out the section 1 portion of the data sheet, which is basically just the information about your site. There's full instructions on what to put in each portion of the data sheet in the volunteer handbook. But briefly, in this top section, you'll be assigned a site number by the project coordinators, and then you'll fill in your volunteer name, so your name, the site name, the city and county that it's located in, and then tell us what type of site it is. Then, if you'd like to, you can fill out on the second page of the data sheet a location diagram that shows you kind of within a larger site where the sandy area with the nest exists. And then, especially if you have a ball field where you found nests, you can use section 4 of the data sheet to kind of diagram on the datasheet where you found the nests. That can make it easier to remember where to look for the nests when you return to look for beetles. So then once you've found Cerceris nests, the next thing is to check around those nests for dropped beetles. And so each time you visit, you should check where you know Cerceris nests have been in previous weeks. Check those areas for beetles. It's also a good idea to check for new nests at each visit. And so each time you visit on section 2 of your data sheet, you will enter the date that you visited, the approximate number of nests that you found at the site, and then if you collect beetles, you'll add more information on that. So if you do find beetles during a site visit, collect them in the Ziploc bag and then fill out a sample tag with pencil again and put it in the bag with the beetles. And so the sample tag also has full instructions in the volunteer handbook, but briefly the code is just the site number that you'll enter. The date is the date that you collected these beetles. The initial section is for you to put your initials, and then the number is the number of beetles that are in that bag. And then remember to finish filling out section 2 with the number of beetles you've collected and add any comments about the site conditions or anything of note from the day. Then when you get home, go ahead and put that Ziploc bag with the beetles and the sample tag inside into your freezer to store it until you send the beetles in at the end of the season. Some people find that it's useful to store the Ziploc bags inside a Tupperware container so that the beetles don't get crushed by other items in your freezer. So ideally, we would love for our volunteers to visit their sites once a week, but if you want to visit your site more or less often, that is also okay. Really, any time you can visit the site is much better than not visiting the site at all. So each time that you visit your site, make sure to fill out a new line in section 2 of the data sheet with that date, the number of nests you encountered, the number of beetles you collected, and any comments about the day. And then just a reminder that when you find beetles and put them in a Ziploc bag, you need a new Ziploc bag with a new sample tag for each day you visit your site. So let's say you visited first on June 22nd and you found 5 beetles. Those 5 beetles and the sample tag from June 22nd would be in one Ziploc bag. If you come back on June 29th, 1 week later, and you find 7 beetles that time, those 7 beetles and their sample tag with the date of June 29th should be in a new separate Ziploc bag. So throughout the season, as you're participating, you'll receive some project update emails from the First Detector Network and the project coordinators. We encourage you to take photos of what you're finding and share that with the group. And then please don't hesitate to get in touch with WIFDN if you have any questions throughout the season. And so we'll be in direct contact with you, but you can also always reach us at this wifdncoordinator@gmail.com email address. And then at the end of the season, so about mid to late September, the project leads from WIFDN and USDA will give you instructions for submitting your data sheets and sending in your collected beetles. Then USDA will send the beetles to a professional entomologist for identification. And then we'll also ask you to report the number of hours you spent monitoring for the project that year and give us additional feedback in the end of season survey, and we'll email this directly to you. So Wasp Watchers has been conducted on and off in Wisconsin since about 2013. And so if you're interested in learning what we've found so far and what sites have been monitored, we have this results dashboard. You can access this from the Wisconsin Wasp Watchers page on the First Detector Network website. So thanks everybody for tuning in to our Wisconsin Wasp Watchers training. Please be in touch if you have any questions, and we look forward to seeing what you find this season.